Have you ever found yourself endlessly scrolling through social media? There's a term for that, and it can have significant impact on your mental health. This is episode 170 of the Healthier Michigan podcast, the podcast dedicated to navigating how we can improve our health and well-being through small, healthy habits that we can start implementing right now. I'm your host, Chuck Gatica. On this episode, we're diving into the effects of something called doomscrolling and how it can affect our mental health and how we can break away from this habit. With me today is licensed clinical social worker and university counselor of the Counseling and Psychological Services Department for Wayne State, Jessica Chester. Jessica, good to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Good morning.
Yeah, good to have you. You know, it's easy, I think, in today's world, really any time. It's just maybe we didn't have these things, but it's kind of easy now to feel overwhelmed by this constant flood of social media content that we get. And it seems from the moment we wake up, our devices are connected to this endless stream of updates and dings and bulletins, and sometimes leaves us feeling anxious and never able to disconnect from it. Doom scrolling has become a widespread habit, and it's one that can take a toll on one's mental health, is what we've been told in various ways. So I guess a good question is, what can we do to break this habit so we can be more mindful of how much time we're spending on this device or any device?
Sure. So I think some of the things that we can do to be more mindful is really just that, being more mindful. So checking in with yourself. What's your mood like when you're online? Are you noticing that you're feeling more stressed as a result of being on social media, for example? Some other things that I think are important to be checking in on is this impacting your sleep? Are you not going to sleep because you're sitting online, or is it the first thing that you're doing when you're waking up? I think really just paying attention to how social media use is impacting your daily habits is a really good place to start.
Yeah, and you know, we talk about, and we're using the examples of social media and doom scrolling, obviously, but this could also be, even though it seems really old school, television news, it can be cable news, it can be radio, it can be really any source.
Sure.
But this is the one that you're talking about, and I find it interesting that you mentioned this idea of checking your mood because, well, it's a question I'll have for you. Could your mood also be influencing the fact, before you get into doom scrolling, that that's where you're now heading for some kind of comfort? You know what I mean? It's not just that the doom scrolling is changing your mood. Did your mood change and then you're gravitating toward picking it up and going at it?
Absolutely. And I think this is the biggest thing that we're seeing is not so much, or I shouldn't say that we know it. This is such a new concept that we don't have a ton of research to be able to say exactly how it affects our brains necessarily. But what we do know is that people that are more prone to being depressed or anxious tend to be more profoundly impacted by doom scrolling. So if you are already in a place of having some depressive symptoms or symptoms of anxiety, we see that oftentimes people are turning to their device almost to kind of validate that headspace that they're already in. So they're seeking out maybe more negative types of content or content that validates their worldview or their view of themselves. And so then on certain apps, there's an algorithm. So you start seeing, it starts to track the patterns of content that you're looking at and continues to give you more and more of that. So you're not seeing the other side of it, the more happy, the positive things. You're kind of just continuing to get more and more of the same. And that can have a really big impact on your mood, certainly.
And that really can mess with us because I would assume, even though we think we're in control while we're looking at stuff, those algorithms can start to affect our habits. You know, like you would think, well, I can break this habit. I'll just look for some happy news. But yet the algorithms are starting to send more stuff.
Right.
And you're falling into that trap. It is becoming a habit, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. We know that social media in particular, these like short form type videos that we see in like different reels or apps that have that type of feature, that it lights up our brain very similar to like a slot machine. And so we're constantly like flipping to the next thing, even if it's not something that's exciting, even if it's something that elicits a negative connotation. It is that like dopamine seeking behavior that keeps us really stuck and having a hard time breaking away.
Is the shortness of those things part of the idea? Because we're kind of I've always been a visual learner, so I appreciate video. But I think I read back I don't know how many years ago that the human attention span had dropped to 8 seconds, and that's 9 seconds is the attention span of a goldfish. And I thought, man, we really only have about 8 seconds. That's all you got me for. And I think that's part of the reason we've seen these things go from 20 minutes to 10 minutes to 2 minutes, and now it's even less, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the like anecdotally, and in terms of research, the one thing that we know for sure is that this short format type content that's out there is having a really big impact on our ability to focus. And I work with college students all day. So, they're often speaking about how difficult it is to pay attention to a lecture or to even like watch a normal movie or read a book. Like it's really difficult because they are so used to being able to obtain information in 3 minutes or less. And like you said, research is showing that our attention span is dropping every day. So it's hard to compete with that.
Well, over time, and I guess it's changed because of streaming and just young people. You would know better than anybody else. Anybody even watching traditional news, on average. But back in the day, television news stations tried to change to an all positive kind of a news approach, and they failed miserably. I mean, in under a year, they just failed, and they went back to the old way of doing things, which is, the big stories at the top are negative, and that's what gets you to tune in, and, breaking news and all the stuff that screams at you. That's now become commonplace on social media. So that leads to this idea of doom scrolling where you just kind of get stuck. How do you know you've got a habit that's becoming bad? How do you know that? What are the warning signs that you're falling into this cycle?
Absolutely. And I think we kind of spoke to some of these things earlier. I think that if you're noticing, you know, hours and hours are being spent just looking at information, are people pointing it out to you? Are they saying that they're concerned? If you're a parent, has your child said something to you about how, you're on your phone frequently, or, are you noticing that your ability to complete tasks or do the things that you need to be doing is being impacted by the fact that you can't break away from your phone? I think we can all empathize with that and are guilty of it. Occasionally is, you have to go to the grocery store and you just kind of get stuck looking at things, and then hours go by. So just paying attention to are the things that you're supposed to be doing being impacted, but also how do you feel? Are you feeling badly after you're online for hours looking at, negative news or negative content on the internet? I think that's the biggest indicator because it's different for everyone. But really paying attention to how do you feel after using it.
Yeah. And maybe also how you feel after you've unplugged from it for a while.
Sure.
Whether it's your own motivation to do that or somebody kind of waved a flag and went, hey, you're doing this a lot. Maybe you do feel better when you've detached, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
I often think of that idea of, you can unplug a vacuum and it'll work again tomorrow when you plug it back in. I mean, you can unplug from this thing. It's hard, but you can unplug from it and it'll work again tomorrow, right?
Exactly. Oftentimes we forget that this is such a new technology. Like we didn't have access to this. When I was a kid, that was not a thing. Like you had to actively go onto a computer and seek out information. Like we didn't have it in our pocket. We didn't have something to distract us constantly. You're right. It does work tomorrow. So taking a detox or a break or whatever you want to call it is super important. And that's one of the things that we can do to try to break that cycle.
And the name itself, doom scrolling, implies something that I think is important here, that this is not just you're hooked on National Geographic stuff. Everybody has a hobby or an interest. This is doom. This is negative news that's attracting us. Is part of that because of the way we're wired as human beings, that we say we don't want to hear it, la, 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 I don't want to hear bad news, but yet we still want to peek in behind the curtain, even if it's just for a couple seconds.
I certainly think that that's an aspect of it. Kind of just being attracted to like drama or, kind of sensationalist type things. Like we kind of want to know, we seek it out, we seek out that information. And I think the other part of it is just, the state of the world right now too.
Right.
And this really became a big like thing around COVID. It probably existed before that, but I think it all came into our collective consciousness kind of around COVID. And so with that and everything that's going on in the world, I think that it changes people's outlook on things. And so they often seek out information to kind of validate why they're feeling stressed or concerned or what have you. So a lot of that involves looking at other things that are, unpleasant or kind of doom and gloom.
It's kind of interesting to me that also you don't see as many talk shows like this. The old days where there used to be fist fights in talk shows, or I guess even,
Sure.
Some of the doctors will leave their names out that do a show. And I read some research a few years back that said a lot of people watch those shows because they literally want to find somebody in worse shape than they are in their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, man, that's psychologically, that's kind of a strange thing when you go searching for more doom, so your life seems more better,
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you hit it on the head is we just want to make sure we're okay. So if other people are having it worse than us, then that means things aren't so bad with us. And I think with social media too, what we often see is especially like with like younger people is there's so much comparing themselves to the lives of others. And even though that might not be the most negative content, but that can have a really big impact on your self-esteem and your self-worth, is if you're seeing all of these people that have, seemingly amazing lives, and then you're feeling bad about yourself, like that has a really big impact too.
That's really interesting. And so there have to be practical strategies to decouple, right? To break this habit that we're feeling. And it's not just important news. And I'll give you a really interesting example. So, I've got 2 dogs. One's a Labradoodle. I think someday she's going to teach herself how to drive. That's how smart she is. But what's funny is I have haptics. I have sounds on my phone that when my camera doorbell sees somebody come and deliver a package, it just goes bing. I don't even know which sound it is. It's just a bing. She now thinks that any sound that comes out of this phone means someone has come to the front door, which it doesn't. And she runs to the front door. She's now been trained that a sound that comes off of my phone means, oh, we better go look.
Right.
And I find that I knew that your episode was coming up for us to talk about. It's interesting that now, like Pavlov's dog, I have one, is trained to hear a sound which tells me I'm trained to, ding, oh, I better see, is that a big news story? Has something happened during the politics season? Like, what's going on? But we're all kind of trained with that instinct now to snap our heads and look for something, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about conditioning. So yeah, we're all conditioned now. To the notifications that we receive on our phones, to kind of this compulsion to check our social medias or different things.
Right.
Yeah, we've trained ourselves to be conditioned now to that.
How do we untrain ourselves, Jessica?
That's a good question. I think, again, for everybody, it's different, but I think there are some common things that are useful. A lot of people will talk about how they've tried to stop and they just can't help themselves. They just keep going back to it. So I think there's some like easy, concrete, practical things that you can try if you haven't tried these already. The first thing, like we talked about earlier, just kind of being mindful about your use. I think being mindful about where you are before you go online. So like checking in with yourself. Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? Are you bored? Are you tired? Why are you going to, check whatever site?
Yeah.
Is there some other need that needs to be met but you're not like actually paying attention to it? So could that happen first beforehand? Again, checking in about your mood. Are you happy, sad, stressed, anxious? checking in to see, like, am I in a good headspace to go check my social media, or is that just going to kind of exacerbate where I'm already at right now? The other thing that I would recommend is setting some boundaries about how often you check the news. So maybe you tell yourself, I'm only going to check it once in the day, in the evening, or something, or first thing in the morning, I'll check, but that be it. Setting a firm limit for yourself about how often you're going to check things can be helpful. Another option is setting limits, time limits for how long you'll allow yourself. There are apps out there that you can download. Some of them are free, some of them have in-app purchases, but they can, track how long you're on an application and give you a warning, or they can kind of disrupt your time to say, hey, is there anything else you can be doing right now, or do you want to continue to do this? So it can kind of be like a hard interruption to what you're doing. If you're finding yourself just endlessly scrolling, something like that might be a good thing to consider.
Yeah.
And an easy one is, a lot of people don't realize this, but you can change the settings in your phone so that your screen is in black and white. And it makes it a lot less interesting to look at, and not as entertaining. So sometimes that can be a really easy one. And it doesn't seem like it would be a big deal, but it certainly makes it less thrilling to look at, I guess.
That's an interesting one, because I spent a lifetime in television news, and I remember having this discussion. It wasn't an argument, but it was a discussion about why we would put a helicopter in the air for, in the day, $300 an hour to fly over a vacant house on fire with nobody in it, no traffic disruptions, not catching fire to a next door neighbor's house because there weren't any. And I asked, this wasn't even in my wheelhouse, but I said, why are we doing that? Well, because they're 20-foot flames. Well, yeah, but it's not affecting anybody. Well, yeah, but it's visual. And so when you say this, that's a really interesting way to turn off some of the, it's not a fire where we all kind of go, oh my gosh, look at that.
Right.
But it leads to that other question. Is this doom scrolling, is this news that we're seeking out really affecting us? Or is it just because there are purse snatchings in California? They're not happening in Southeast Michigan. So why do you get all upset about it? You know what I mean? Is it news that's affecting us?
Right.
And I think that's a good question to ask too.
I think that is a good question to ask. And in the meantime, trying to take some of our natural human instinct, which is to like look at something bright and shiny and make it less interesting to look at, is a good way to kind of make it easier to say, no, I'm good, and pass and do something else.
Boy, that's a brilliant one. Make the fancy, shiny, bright, shiny news less attractive, right? Wow. Just make it boring. Just make it boring, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So how do you suggest that, whether it's to the college kids you're working with or to any of us, how do you suggest that we stay balanced and informed at the same time and protect our mental health? Because it doesn't seem to me that a lot of people I meet, maybe I just don't ask enough of them, are really looking for balanced news. You're left of center or right of center politically, so that's where you navigate a lot of times. But do you suggest we just look for multiple sources? But how do we do this and still protect our mental health?
That's a tricky one, because I think people often already know where they're at, like politically and things. And so there's a tendency to just look at content that reaffirms our current beliefs or opinions on things. And so, I mean, I get that. I think we're all guilty of that. I think that one thing you could do is, make sure that you're seeking out reputable sources. In a conversation that I was having with somebody else about a similar topic, it was recommended to, also include like international news, because they sometimes are a little bit more removed from what's happening in the U.S. and sometimes it can give you a little bit of a fair summary of a topic or what have you. But then also just kind of give you a little bit more perspective about other things that are happening outside of your state or what have you. The other thing is making sure you're choosing reliable sources. I think there's a lot of clickbait that's out there, and it's got a title, and there's a lot of stuff that's not real on the internet. And so making sure that you're reading information from reliable sources would be good. I think you kind of touched on this earlier, so this can be difficult, but trying to prioritize positive news or looking for what are you trying to find out, and looking specifically for that as opposed to consuming everything that's out there. And I think the biggest thing is like just take a day off, like Sunday or whatever day you want. Just be like, I'm not going to go on the internet. Yeah, exactly. Do not disturb. Like, tell people so that they know and they're not concerned that you're missing or something. But just say, hey, right. I'm not going to check my phone on Saturdays. I'm just going to, unplug. And it's really important. And it might seem silly, but like we have to set an intention or else it's not going to happen. So, make a goal and say, I'm going to, do this, even if it's not all day, for half the day. Just give yourself a break.
I like that phrase. I don't know where it came from, this idea. I like this phrase of a digital fast because it sounds to me like you're fasting from food. You can make it part of your calendar, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, our counseling department here at Wayne State, for several years now, we've been running a support group for students that want to take a break from digital social media and things. And so we actually have a group that we run here to help give some people support in doing that. So
what takeaways would you leave with our audience after all we've talked about, which is so much great stuff?
Yeah, I think my biggest takeaway would just be, social media use or news consumption isn't bad inherently, but it's important that you monitor your use. And if you're noticing that it's having an impact on you or the people around you, then you got to make some changes and put some limits on it. Again, it's not inherently bad, but it's a lot. And so we just have to check in with ourselves. And, if you're trying to reduce your usage and you're having a hard time, or you're noticing that it's having a really big impact on your mood or your mental health in general, you can always speak to your physician or speak to a mental health professional if you've tried some of these strategies on your own and are encountering some challenges in doing so. There might be additional help out there that you can get.
It's all great stuff. Jessica, thanks so much for being with us today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, sure thing. Jessica Chester from Wayne State University helping us get a handle on this idea of doom scrolling. We're glad you were listening today to a Healthier Michigan podcast. It's brought to you by Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. If you like the show, you want to know more, even to suggest this episode, lots of ways to do that. You can jump online at healthiermichigan.org/podcast, or you can leave us a review or rating on Apple Podcast or Spotify. You can also follow us. Don't be doom scrolling, but you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or X. You can get new episodes, all of our old episodes. Be sure to subscribe to us as well on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. I'm Chuck Gatica. Stay well.